I'm the Shredder, and the opinions I'm about to express are my own, but before I get started, there's an issue regarding my last commentary I would like to address here and now. In my last commentary, I referred to the YouTube user DPR Jones as the main apologist for Thunderfoot and his behaviour here on YouTube. Since then, I've spoken publicly and privately to DPR Jones and witnessed DPR Jones firsthand openly criticise Thunderfoot and some of his behaviour on this website. I accept that my statement was a gross misrepresentation and wish to take this time to retract said statement and apologise to DPR Jones. I, however, will not be offering that same courtesy towards Thunderfoot, and indeed, some of the statements I am about to make against Thunderfoot I will be backing up with Thunderfoot's own words. Now, in Thunderfoot's latest video, he is attempting to justify why we shouldn't really be calling him or his arguments bigoted by stating that he made these exact same comments during his Why Do People Laugh at Creationist videos. Now, the problem is, Thunderfoot, that during the Why Do People Laugh at Creationist videos, you were refuting a viewpoint of some religious people, not all religious, some religious people, of the idea of creationism. Now, you were refuting these comments through scientific fact and logic. Your statements towards Islam in the past several months have been nothing short of character assassination, gross misrepresentation of the truth, appeals to emotion, outright lies, and generalization of all Muslims. Now, with regards to generalization of all Muslims, I'm going to actually read some comments from Thunderfoot's first video regarding this subject, South Park versus Islam, and I'd like you to please tell me whether or not you think these are generalizing comments of Muslims. And I quote the opening statement: "This time the Muslims are threatening the creators of South Park." Later on in said video, "And now, seeing as South Park recently depicted Muhammad in disguise as a giant bear, they decided to also generously warn the creators of South Park that they will end up like Theo Van Gogh." On that same video, on the subject of Theo Van Gogh, "Bravo, and a prime example of why your religion has no place in the first world." Now, while in that same video, Thunderfoot, you never once mentioned that these death threats came from a fundamentalist Islamic website called revolutionmuslim.com, you were willing to bring up an interview with one of, I believe, 10 members of this website, revolutionmuslim.com, where he was quoted as saying that they are commanded to terrorize the infidels as it is mandated in the Quran, as if to show that this is the typical attitude of all Muslims. Shortly after this, you said the following regarding moderates: "The criticism of the moderate Muslims was conspicuous only by its absence, and that really does speak volumes of their attitudes to these acts." Now, this claim is debunked by the simplest of Google searches or even a quick search on YouTube. Muslims came out against the actions of Revolution Muslim the same way as they did against the actions of 9/11, the 7/7 bombings, the Madrid train bombings, the attempted 21/7 bombings in London, the attempted attack on Glasgow Airport, and numerous other attacks committed around the world in the name of fundamentalist Islam. But in this same video, Thunderfoot, you also described the military capability of the difference in military capability of the Western world and the advanced warriors of Islam as the difference between ants and gods, with it only being the good grace of the giant that stands between their continued existence and a holocaust, while bringing up imagery of said weaponry. Now, Thunderfoot, this statement is disgusting in itself and is why people thought that you were endorsing mass genocide of Muslims. Now, don't take my word on this, ladies and gentlemen. Please go and watch Thunderfoot's video, South Park versus Islam, and come up with some quote where Thunderfoot differentiates between the actions of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda or like extremist groups like Revolution Muslim and moderate Muslims. He doesn't. If you can bring up a quote, please let me know. And what befuddles me, Thunderfoot, is the fact is, when you make these statements, when you use these imagery, when you even use comments like "shock and awe was merely the giant's irresponsible child playing with kid gloves," you can't, for the love of God, understand why a moderate Muslim would be mad at you over this. Dawa Films made a response to Thunderfoot, which you, Thunderfoot, spun into a death threat. No, not posted as a death threat. No, you not misinterpreted, you spun this into a death threat. And allow me to read the quote from Dawa Films, just minus the subtitles that Thunderfoot inserted, like "a moderate Muslim" or "the baneful state of the religion of peace." This was the quote from Dawa Films on Thunderfoot's video, Death Threats from Moderate Muslims. "Thunderfoot, and people who think like you, if you ever try to awaken any sort of sleeping giant that is hostile to any Muslim or non-Muslim innocent person, as mandated in the Quran, in the true interpretation of the Sharia that all true Muslims and the majority of the Muslims in the world share, We Muslims, the servants of Allah and our non-Muslim allies, will send you to the God that you wish you knew. Not as a threat, not as a promise, but as a mandate of justice. Now, in case you've missed it, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to read a certain part of that comment once more. If you ever try to awaken any sort of sleeping giant that is hostile to any Muslim or non-Muslim innocent person. This was a response to the notion that Thunderfoot was condoning mass genocide, not a direct death threat to Thunderfoot himself. Now, Thunderfoot's response to this was to spin the death threat, to spin it as a death threat, I should say, and even taunt Dawa Films with such lovely comments as, "What are you going to do? Come to America and start gunning people down in the street that disagree with you?" Now, Thunderfoot, I will admit, Dawa Films was a little heavy-handed with its response here, but your response was disgusting in its entirety. Dawa Films had the nerve, at least, and the courage to come on camera and express his regret for some of the words that he said, clarify what he meant, and even extend the invitation to a civilized debate. Your response was to spit on this invitation. What was it you said, Thunderfoot? You wouldn't debate someone who had threatened you with violence. And this isn't the only time that Thunderfoot turned down the invitation to discuss things with Dawa Films. Rithran Dill had DPR Jones and Thunderfoot in blog TV discussion over Skype, and Rith even offered to bring Dawa Films into the conversation, and Thunderfoot's response was, "I'd rather you didn't." Let that sink in for one moment, ladies and gentlemen. Thunderfoot, the main proponent of free speech and free debate on YouTube, refuses to debate a Muslim about Islam. Smacks of hypocrisy, if you ask me. Now, let's just address one of your last videos, the real threat from Islam. And in this video, you make claims to somehow support your arguments about how Islamic nations have no right to lecture anyone else on how to run the world, as they still live in the Dark Ages. But like everyone else, Thunderfoot, I'm going to refer you to the arguments of D-Land and Cole, because I would love to see you try and take those apart. But Thunderfoot, please explain to us all why it is that a Muslim American is judged by the actions of Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabian terrorists, and terrorists from other parts of the Middle East. Why is it that it is a jerk move for him to open up a community centre that just happens to have a pair of prayer rooms? Is it not a jerk move for the mosque already in place to still exist and people to pray there? Is it not a jerk move for the Pentagon to have placed Islamic prayer rooms in that building, given the fact that people died there on September the 11th? Grow up, Thunderfoot. But I'm going to try and refute some of your statements here as well, because DPR Jones made an interesting point, which was that we couldn't refute some of your facts, that you were factually accurate. I have now done my research, and I can state categorically that Thunderfoot is not factually accurate in this video. The only fact that Thunderfoot really has got accurate in this video is that Muslims make up 20% of the world's population. Now, that does not mean that 20% of the world's population lives in the mainstream Islamic world, as you would put it, Thunderfoot, although, as you later clarified, the Arab world. As a matter of fact, if we look at the population count of the Arab world, we get a figure of 358 million. That may sound a lot, but it is nowhere near the 1.5 billion that you have quoted. It's less than 25%. Indeed, that figure makes up just 5% of the world's population, a population that you called a detriment to the world. Now, do you really think that you can take this figure of 358 million and use this as a true representation of Muslims, when over 75% of Muslims do not live in the mainstream Islamic world? And given the number of different denominations of Islam, Thunderfoot, how can you call this a true representation of all Muslims? I'm just curious. Oh, and by the way, Thunderfoot, the continent of Africa makes up 13% of the world's population. I'm just curious, Thunderfoot, because Africa has not produced a great deal of scientific papers as of late. Does that make them a detriment to the world, or is this statement exclusive to Islam? And the fact is, Thunderfoot, your idea that these people should somehow be paying their way out and investing in scientific research and producing scientific papers is flawed. The fact of the matter is, Thunderfoot, that a certain elite in these countries becomes rich, the majority of people on the ground are poor. And the reason that the reason that there's no scientific research is because when these people become rich, they prefer to live the good life rather than invest all their money in scientific research. Most people living on the ground, Thunderfoot, though, are dirt poor, who struggle to feed themselves and cannot even see a doctor to the same standard that you or I would expect in the Western world. And these are the conditions that Al-Qaeda preys on. Not Islam, Thunderfoot. Islam is not the main contributing factor to people joining and supporting Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. It is a resentment of the actions of the Western world. In the Iran-Iraq war, the Western world sold weapons to Iraq and gave weapons to the Iranians in order for them to destroy one another. We have invaded a country that had no involvement whatsoever in the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and we have made no concerted effort to actually find the person responsible. We in the Western world go to these countries, buy up oil extremely cheaply, and use it as if it was tap water. We drive cars in this country that cost more than these people in the Middle East will earn in their entire lifetime. We waste food while these people are starving. Thunderfoot, this is the kind of resentment that causes people to be hostile towards the Western world, not just Islam. And it is quite disturbing the fact that you were a main proponent against the war in Iraq, but now you're making videos bragging about the military capability of the Western world compared to the Middle East. You know, please, Thunderfoot, explain in what way exactly that tanks and aircraft trump IEDs, or are more superior to IEDs. But just out of curiosity, Thunderfoot, let's just say you were living in these impoverished conditions in the Arabic world. Now, there are no Ivy League schools. You have not the capability to build an Ivy League school. What is your priority, Thunderfoot? Do you think of the greater good to the entire Arab world by saying, hey, I should be doing some scientific research, I should be issuing scientific papers to try and better the society around me? Or would you be like those poor bastards in the Middle East doing what they're doing now and fighting the daily fight to feed themselves and their families? Answer honestly, Thunderfoot. It's all we ask. And until you can give an honest answer, and until you can answer any of these criticisms, I suggest you stop crying about the fact that people have been misrepresenting your arguments as bigoted and calling you a bigot for statements such as this. I'm the Shredder, and that's my opinion.